Okay, looks like we've got everybody that has joined early. So I want to welcome everybody to It's Worth a Shot today. We will be going over plans of correction with MJ Marks. Next slide, please. As always, we want to thank everybody for participating with this every Wednesday. This has been a long-going series, which I'm sure you guys are fully aware of. And today actually marks our, our 61st webinar. So 61 of these under our belts. That's pretty great. Again, if you guys have any suggestions or topic ideas, please go ahead and put them in chat. And also, if you can fill out the survey at the end. Survey is not the correct word. Let me think about it. What's it called again? Evaluation. We would really appreciate it because we do like to view your feedback and let us know how we can carry forward. And then I'm going to pass the baton over to Kyla, who is going to go over the updates or the snapshots for the influenza and COVID in our area. So, oh, is there a polling question?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Sorry about that, guys. Before I pass over to Kyla, we're going to do a polling question. If you want to go ahead and publish that, Mary. Do you include vaccine administration as part of your nurse competencies? So simple yes or no for us. Okay, let's get one more. So we've got 20 responses and then we'll go ahead and close the poll here, but it looks like the no's have it mostly. Anyone else want to answer it for us? Okay, let's go ahead and end the poll, Mary. Okay, I'm gonna, next slide, please. And I'm going to go ahead and hand the baton over to Kyla to go over some of our immunization snapshots.
Thank you, Miranda, and welcome everybody. Happy spring, although I know it doesn't probably feel like it in most of our areas. I've heard reports of snow this week, and certainly in Alaska, it is not looking much like spring, although we're seeing some sunshine. So good news on our influenza report. Seasonal flu, it remains low nationally. Outpatient respiratory illness is now below baseline in 6 of our 10 HHS regions. We are seeing a breakdown of 34% H3N2 strains and 66% are H1N1. All of our pharmacologic agents to treat the flu, our antivirals have been shown effective during this flu season, in the exception of one case being not susceptible to oseltamivir, which is Tamiflu. So that's a very low percentage. So still really good efficacy for folks that do need to get treatment for flu. We have seen 7 new pediatric deaths for a total of 132 pediatric deaths this season. So still encourage folks, if you haven't gotten your flu shot, it's still not too late to get it, as we are seeing some activity, just very low still this spring. And we can go to the next slide and look at our COVID report. So just the same general trend happening here as we're seeing with other respiratory viruses with COVID-19. We're seeing cases, deaths, hospitalizations going down, and vaccination with updated boosters still at a pretty low percentage, and that is still recommended for everybody to get that bivalent booster to make sure you have the best protection against COVID-19. I will go ahead and turn it back to you, I think, Miranda.
Okay, can we go to the next slide, Mary? All right, today I want to introduce MJ Marks, or Mary Jo Marks. She is a she's the Director of Quality at Glendive Medical Center. And fun fact, on April 30th, it's going to be 30 years since she graduated from her nursing degree program, which is pretty fun. She has a 25-year plus background of years of working in long-term care centers. So MJ is going to be going over plans of correction today for us. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, MJ.
Thank you, Miranda. before I have her go to the next slide, just really quickly, is there anybody so new that they don't know the timing of when they get their deficiencies and when they need to turn their plan of correction back in? Either hop on the chat or open up your mic and let me know, because I do not go over that in this one. I wanted to make sure we really focused on the meat, but that is something I would be happy to quickly go over. Someone is saying they're that new, so let's very quickly. I'm just gonna go through that. So surveyors come in. In my neck of the woods, they have to drive 8 hours plus to get to us. They arrive on Monday night. They're trying to leave by Thursday morning at the latest. So when they leave, they have 10 of their business days to write the deficiency list and go through their QA process. Okay, so depending on the state, some have 5-day work weeks, some they have 4-day work weeks, kind of depends. And of course, don't forget your federal holidays in there. But they have 10 business work days to get that to your facility. When your facility receives it, you have 10 calendar days to turn it back into the state. I know, so much fun. It's crazy. And that includes your weekends. So if your 10th day to turn it in is on Saturday or Sunday, it's due Friday. Isn't that great? Now you have 2 less days to work on. So I'm really hoping that what I have for you today is going to be very helpful. As well as Miranda, I do have a quick question. I know I had sent a handout with this. Did you send that out to the group?
I did not. I will go ahead and send it out afterwards.
Okay, that'll be great. So you're going to receive a handout with the stuff that really goes into each point we're going to go over in detail. So I'm hoping it's going to be really, really helpful. Hold on to it for reference. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have gotten our deficiency list, and I am starting out with not a directed plan of correction. Let's say you got it for hand hygiene. I can't tell you how many facilities get it for hand hygiene. It is, I think, one of the easiest things they can cite, because they'll cite it for someone not doing hand hygiene between a glove change. So it's just so simple to get cited for. So there's 5 steps to a plan of correction. The first one is, how is corrective action accomplished for what's involved? So if it's hand hygiene, and let's say that they tell you that it was staff member B, and when you look at your list of who your staff members is, that is Nurse Nancy. And so you go to Nurse Nancy and you give her education, and she has to sign for it. She has to sign that education. Let's say you give her the policy. That's what you're going to put in to number 1, is that staff member B, who equals Nurse Nancy, maybe received a memorandum of understanding for not performing hand hygiene. Within this memorandum was the policy, was education giving by the infection preventionist. It might be that there were videos involved, and maybe you're also going to ask her to teach others how to do correct hand hygiene, because sometimes the best way to learn is to teach it. Those are all ideas that would go in the number 1. Now, number 2 is how others affected are going to be identified. Okay, so we're talking about a staff member in this situation. How do you go around and go, okay, how many staff members aren't doing their hand hygiene, or how many residents are affected by staff members not doing their hand hygiene. So you, and in hand hygiene, you sometimes a blanket statement of, unfortunately, everyone is at risk. A lot of times we do an audit. We do an intensive audit. And you have to identify who's going to do that audit. So let's say your DON and your MDS coordinator and your infection preventionist, if they're 3 different people. It can even be, let's say you're going to have your social worker help. As long as you're all using the same audit form and they've been trained how to use that audit form, they can all go out. And it's how to identify others that need to be trained, or other residents who've maybe had a breach in infection control practices, big as what we're working on, hand hygiene. And that's what you identify in your number 2 slot. Number 3 is what measures will be created and or systemic changes put in place so this deficient practice does not happen again. And so this is something you're always going to look at your policy and procedure. Okay. Do I need to change that? Is there new information? Is there, do we need to change a process? For hand hygiene, probably not. It's pretty straightforward, but you're still going to review that policy, because is there something in the policy that the staff don't understand? So you're still going to review your policy, and then you have to educate, and you have to make sure when you do your education that you have an example of what you utilized for your education. Maybe it's a bullet point, just a Word document with bullet points on it that you reviewed those. Maybe it's links to educational videos. Maybe it's the QSEP. I can't remember what that stands for, but I just happened to look it up yesterday, for long-term care infection control education. You know, what other systemic changes are you putting in place to prevent the deficient practice of lack of hand hygiene happening again? Next slide, please. Okay. Number 4, how will performance be monitored and solutions sustained? So this is where you're going to talk about your audits. You're going to, and actually in number 2, and I apologize for that, you need to name your audit. So go back and write a number 2, make sure you name your audit. You're going to use that same name again in number 4. So that audit is going to be done by whom, how often, when is it reported? What do you do if there is a lack of consistency and compliance? When are you reporting it out at your QAA meeting? We have a statement that we built here at Glendive, got back when QAPI came to be in the regulations, that if, how do we word it? So we put like note, if there is not notable compliance after 2 months of audits or after so many weeks, it kind of depends on your timing of audits, then we will implement a performance improvement project through the QAA committee. We also state that all of our reports, because our long-term care is connected to our critical access hospital, all of that information goes to our board quality committee and then goes to the board of directors. That is also included in our number 4. We are telling our state that this is going on to the oversight board of directors. And then lastly, the timeline for completion. And so when we do each of these steps, we put down kind of like number one, we're going to have that completed by this date. And that date, so sometimes I have had in a situation where we actually made a correction while the surveyors were present. You can never use that date. It has to be the date that after the surveyor left. So sometimes, let's say they leave on the 9th of March, if we corrected it in the middle of survey and we still get cited, I will use that date like the 10th of March as that date of correction that it got corrected for the number one of how something was corrected in the moment for the deficient practice. Number two, we try to get done within a week of getting that deficiency list returned to us from the state. We want to get it done quickly. We want to know where our gaps are. Actually, when they leave, if you've got a pretty good idea, we're already working on that. We're already getting an idea. We're already doing some audits, etc. Because we want to make sure that we can quickly, in our plan of correction, state that we've gotten these things accomplished and that we're able to be in compliance by the date that they tell us we have to be, which is 45 days from the date of exit. And it's 45 calendar days. So date of exit, they had 10 days to 10 working days to send it to us. Then we had 10 calendar days to send it back. You can imagine 45 days after that, you've only got about 30 days left. So you're kind of thinking about that and wanting to move through that as much as you can. Sometimes you have to wait till you get that language back from the survey agency so you can really determine what are they really citing. Because sometimes when they exit, they'll just say, we had a concern with. We had a concern with donning and doffing. How do they word it? Sometimes you have to wait to hear exactly how they worded it before you can move forward and figure out exactly how you're going to fix it. So the timeline for the corrective action is they're going to tell you that, so to speak, drop dead date, you have to be in compliance by here. So if they exit, I'm going to look over to my calendar. Let's say they exited on March 1st, 31 days in March. So have to be in compliance by April 14th. Okay, so you need to have a QAA meeting shortly before that 14th. Now, maybe normally your QAA, maybe your March QAA meeting is in the middle of the month. Well, that's too early. And your April one, let's say it's going to fall after the 14th. So you can do one of two things. You can have a special meeting, which is for the quality people who are also infection control. Or you can just move up your entire quality meeting for that month. Sorry, I digress there. You can tell my quality brain just took over for a minute. So those are the things you need to work through for that. Next slide, please. Okay, corrective action. So I actually, because I'm not going to deny this. I can't imagine. There's probably many people on this phone call that have actually been in the middle of a directed plan of correction. If you haven't, Kudos to you, kudos to your team. It's not a whole lot of fun on our end. So I have to move something here so I can, there we go. So it actually says alongside your deficiency, and it would happen to be F880, by the way, just so you know, will immediately implement an appropriate infection prevention. It tells you exactly what you're going to do. It also tells you who's going to be a part of it and what they're going to do. So in this particular directed plan of correction, we had a problem with COVID-19 screenings, and we had a problem with hand hygiene, and they threw them together because why not? So that's what they said we had to do immediately. We had those 3 people, and the medical director is probably kind of a silent partner in this. If you're fortunate enough to have a medical director who is really gung-ho, good for you. A lot of times out here in my world, they're kind of a silent partner. So the first thing you're doing as soon as you get that is you're having education. How do you screen? And more than likely, because of COVID, they were talking to you a lot during the survey about what their problem is with your screening. So you probably already did this before you ever got your deficiency, this directed plan of correction back. Is you did education, you did one-on-one, you did, we do huddles every morning, Monday through Friday, giving the same information over and over. Everybody has to sign in. You've got to have that sign-in sheet. And then we also went over hand hygiene procedures as well. Next slide, please. Okay. How do you identify others? They're going to tell you, I mean, they tell you how you're going to do that. You're going to review current guidelines. You're going to evaluate compliance, develop action plans to address newly identified. So, and they actually give you the URL of where to go. And so what we did with this is we took out the guidelines, and we have to show documentation that we really did evaluate our compliance. And so I just made a table and wrote down kind of the elements, and then wrote down, you know, is it in our policy? Is it, you know, all of those things. And so the interdisciplinary team, that included social services, that included activities, a CNA coordinator or a CNA lead, restorative CNA, all at the table, you know, looking at, you know, where are we compliant, where aren't we, what do we need to work on? And then from that, developing that action plan. Next slide, please. Okay, system changes. Again, they tell you titles of who's going to do that. You're going to do a root cause analysis. You're then going to ensure that people get education and training. And then this was always fun because Marcy Gallagher can tell you that this was in the directed plan of correction. And when I called her and said, hey, Marcy at Mountain Pacific Quality, I'm supposed to contact you for help improving my infection prevention and control. And she went, what are you talking about? They will put this in there and they will expect to see documentation that you actually reached out. And so I had a phone conversation and then I followed it up with an actual email. So there was an email back and forth and I copied that for my validation that I had actually done that. And then again, you know, the root cause, you have to have that all written down. Next slide, please. Okay, monitoring. They're going to tell you how often to monitor. Now, this says your DON and your infection preventionist, but that doesn't mean it has to be just them. You can also include more. This is the minimum. And they tell you, you know, how often you're going to monitor, etc. And that if there's non-compliance, you're educating and documenting, you're bringing it to your QAA committee. Next slide, please. Okay, so this correction date was about 14 days before anything else within the deficiencies that you received on the 2567. So a directed plan of correction is going to give you a correction date, a completion date that is earlier than everything else on the 2567. So you need to be aware of that, because that's going to take precedence, and sometimes that education is going to have to be done before the education that maybe nursing has to do because of, I'm racking my brain for numerous things, because restorative documentation wasn't showing the refusals of someone who had a decline in their, they needed more assistance, and there wasn't documentation to prove that they should have been losing some abilities. So, and I really, it is 2:58 on my computer. So I'm sorry, feel like, well,
You're doing great, MJ. You're doing
I
great.
know, but I want to make sure that people have a chance to ask questions.
So we have a couple more minutes left. If anybody has questions and want to come off mute, MJ, would you be willing to stay a couple minutes after to answer?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Also, if there are quite a few questions, we can maybe look into doing a follow-up webinar with this. If we field a lot of questions, then maybe we could do just a simple question and answer webinar where you're kind of there. We could get a panel or something like that where people can help kind of answer questions that they might have, or give more information on specific areas if that's what it looks like the questions are pointing towards. So Mary, you want to go to next slide for the questions and answers? And then does anybody want to come off mute? I don't see anything in chat, but does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? No, looks like we've got a quiet crowd today. Okay, so if you do have any questions or something comes up later, feel free to reach out to us at Mountain Pacific, and we will definitely rope MJ in to help us. And if there are any questions that come up later, we can always attach them to next week's It's Worth a Shot in the questions and answers section that we do prior to the webinar starting. MJ, I want to thank you so much for participating with us today and taking your time to present. We really appreciate outside presenters, coming on to join us. And I just want to remind everybody to please go ahead and fill out the evaluation link that Mary placed in there. And I want to let everybody know to have a great day, a great week, and we will see you next Wednesday. Thank you, everybody.